What's up, everyone? I'm Shadeen, and welcome to another episode of Outpour.
I've got a rebel soul. I've got a rebel soul. I've got a rebel soul. Just get down with it, down with it, down with it. Just get down. Got a rebel soul. I've got a rebel soul.
This is a show where every week we are talking LGBTQ pop culture and social justice. Now, I know that you all remember this beautiful face, Big Daddy Rob, back in the studio with us this week. I know that we were only going to have him as a guest for one episode, but you loved him so much we had to have him back. Rob had an opportunity to talk to social worker and entrepreneur Sappho, and they talked about domestic violence in the LGBTQ community. Let's take a look.
When you're next to me.
As a therapist and a person who owns their own nonprofit, why do you think that we are plagued with domestic violence, LGBTQ relationships?
Wow, you just jumped straight in, man.
You gotta go hard to go home.
Yeah, you just went straight into the jugular. Okay, so why do I think?
Yes.
Why I think is not as important as why I've researched and found that it has a relevant factor as why it is. It's not why I think, but why it is. When we talk about intergenerational trauma among black folks, we talk about intergenerational slave trauma. We talk about systems that have taught us to act and respond a certain way. One, and then we have a gender construct. Two. You understand? So we have to be a certain way in order to be normalized.
So that masculine feminine construct in relationships.
Oh, especially among lesbian women. Especially one of the things that I unpacked with researching domestic violence, I've had my own personal experience with domestic violence, and one of the things that I researched and I learned about was that, that gender script was very heavy in our relationship. It was very significant. In other words, we came into these same-sex relationships, and you can talk more from a masculine position, but we come into these relationships as two women, and in my mindset, because the relationship, normal relationship that I've learned was from male and female, mom and dad.
Exactly.
So you got a male head of the household, and you have a mom that is, submissive, and she's been provided for. She takes care of you. She has certain roles, certain job roles. So you have that mindset, that ideology coming into the relationship of what you know is normal. So I have gone into many relationships with this misinformed information.
So would you say that misinformed information comes from the heteronormative standards?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talk about black folks, we don't talk about
The problems in our home and the trauma that we
the
experience.
problems that we experience. And that kind of is what keeps us stuck in that system.
What type of therapy should someone seek when they have unresolved traumas dealing with abuse?
For me, I had to find my quiet place. It was very painful because I couldn't talk to people until the incident came up. And then I was going to school or I was going to work, and here I am again with the black eye. I'm butchering the relationship with the black guy. I'm not saying that, now let's be clear. A lot of these fights, 90% of these fights, I started. Let's be clear. But because of my light skin, I would wind up with the black guy,
Right.
in the hospital for a month, with the pelvic broken, literally. What happened? I started going to therapy in school.
Okay. So seeking guidance with the school counselor.
I did, but that didn't get it. That just made me know that something was the fuck wrong with me. You understand? Like something was the fuck wrong, and it was deeper than just that fight at home. Some kind of something was going on that was deep inside that I had to get in touch with. I had to peel back the onion. I had to go deep.
When we're dealing with couples and there's an abuser and a victim, when the victim comes to you and says, I've just been in an altercation, a physical altercation with my partner, what do I do? How do I handle that? How do I stay? Do I go? Do we have a conversation? what type of advice as a therapist would you suggest to them?
So the first thing I want to know, are you sick? This just happened to me the other day. A person said to me that someone broke into their home and they were gang raped. It was a trans woman, and she said that her boyfriend is abusing her, and she's not sick. So my recommendation for her was to call over to the lab, find an org that caters to your age.
So people often don't think about the impact that domestic violence has, not only on a relationship, but on both parties involved. I'm wondering, for any of you who might have experienced domestic violence, if you can say anything about what those impacts might be.
I wasn't the victim during my times with my experience with domestic violence. I was the aggressor. I was dealing with a lot of trauma that were unresolved, that I had not yet dealt with. Things from my childhood, things from my teenage years, and I hadn't really resolved issues with being called a faggot or things like that. And I remember the first time I smacked my boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend, was because he called me a faggot. I was 18 years old, he was 17. And I smacked him and I said to him, "Don't you ever call me a faggot again." And although those words hold no power of me at this moment, I realized the effects of, the trauma that I experienced growing up, the effects of being chastised or called demeaning names, and I had not resolved those issues. And we fought the entire 8 years. And I remember when we broke up, I said to myself, I went through a serious bout with depression, and I thought about self-harm and suicide because of everything I experienced from that relationship and everything I experienced prior to that relationship. I have not resolved those issues with myself. And like most young black men and women, I did not seek therapy. And I decided to resolve those issues on my own, which did help me. But, I said to myself, I would never harm someone that I claim to love. I would never harm someone that I'm giving my body to or my mind to or my soul, because the harm that I'm physically and emotionally and psychologically causing to them does more damage. And if he does not resolve those issues, he takes that on with him to the next relationship. And he becomes either the victim again or the abuser. And that was a cycle that I wanted to stop. And although he and I have a good relationship right now, I cannot help but think about the mental, the psychological, the emotional trauma that I caused him. Like, we literally fought in the middle of the street, in the projects in South Philadelphia. The cops came and everything. It was that bad because we weren't even at a point where we could communicate. Our communication was with our hands, where if we could not solve with our words and it did not resolve within 1 to 2 minutes, I was smacking the shit out of him, because I just felt like it was not seeking through, and he was disrespecting me to the point where, as though the only way he was going to receive that message was if I was to smack him or punch him or beat him.
And that was the norm for you.
At that time in my life, that was the norm.
Shadeen, I think a lot of times we don't address that because it has become normal in relationships. We've seen our mothers be abused. We've seen our fathers do the abusing. And it has become generational. Let's go one generation to the next. It's like, oh, I see my mom, get slapped up by my father several times. That's nothing. That happens all the time.
That's love.
That's love.
That's love.
You have anything to say about that particularly?
You know what? For me, what it makes me think about is kind of how I've always, exactly what we just talked about, is how hitting, and I've always told myself that if someone put their hands on me, that is not love, and I would stand for it. Okay. So I've always been very frank and very clear about that, and typically upfront with my partners or potential partners prior to us engaging in a relationship is me being upfront with, okay, have you ever had experience with domestic violence or domestic abuse? Yeah. Have you engaged in those type of things? Have you ever been so as inclined or to a point where you wanted to put your hands on your partner so that I can know who I'm dealing with and who my partner is, so that they can know what my boundaries are and where I stand when it comes to that? Because it also makes me think, okay, so what exactly is domestic violence? Does that only consist of someone being hit? And also, do you have to be in a relationship with someone in order to have experienced domestic violence?
I think that when it comes to domestic violence, it does not just stop at physical violence. there's emotional abuse and emotional violence and psychological violence. And that's the thing that we tend to overlook. We don't realize what that does to people. You know, when I think of emotional, it's the fact that how you verbally address or verbally attack someone can affect their entire mood throughout the day or how they view themselves. And then you look at the physical part where you're leaving bruises and marks. And some people can say, you know what, I can take that. But I can take being punched and hit. But I can't take what you're doing to me up here.
Exactly.
Because you're defeating me as a person. You're demeaning my character. You understand?
I think the mental aspect takes on a whole different toll as far as trauma. Yeah, as far as the emotional scars that remain after, you know, the incident happens. So I'm going to be open and honest. For me, and you asked the leading question before, have anyone else, you know, have ever dealt with, you know, some type of domestic violence? Me physically, no. But emotionally, I would make my partner feel like trash. I would make my partner feel so guilty if I didn't get my way. And you know, he literally felt it. And I can say, yes, I was emotionally, you know, harming him in that moment and it was early in the morning. It would stay with you during the rest of your day.
Did you realize that while you were in it, or was this a realization you had afterward?
Oh, of course I realized while I was in it.
Abusers.
Where that came from? Like that, Rob, you know, really generously offered that for you it was a lot about shame, which is pretty typical in folks who inflict harm. And I'm wondering if you have a sense of where that came from.
Power.
Power.
The sense of power, regaining power, keeping the power.
Wanting power, wanting more power, or fear of losing power?
Both. It's both aspects. Wanting more, fear of losing what you already currently have.
See, abusers know the detrimental effects they have on their partners. You know, if you take time to learn that person, you know how that's going to affect them. You know it will carry them through the entire day. You know it will defeat them. You know they will succumb to your every beck and call. And although I was physically abusive, he was verbally abusive, and that damaged me a whole lot more. So my response was to attack him. Because you're like, literally, like, okay, so clearly I'm a dark-skinned man. And growing up, I was always too black. I was always too dark. So he would call me a monkey. And he would say, you black bitch. You like Beanie Siegel with that, because I always had facial hair. It wasn't always like this, but you know, I had like something like similar to Tony's, a little shorter. And he would just attack me. And it made me feel so small. And here I was, this guy who had it going on. But he had nothing compared to me. So for him, his form of abuse was to demean me and make me feel small so that he could feel grand. But for me, I was taking my power back by attacking him. And we don't realize where that comes from. Like Aaron just said earlier, we see that come from our parents. And for him, he saw his mother being beaten by her boyfriend, who was no more than 3 years older than he was. I'm sorry. So he witnessed that violence in the home, and he accepted that in his own relationship because that was the norm for him. But if we don't break away from that, we have this violence going on as a generational curse. And we end up doing damage furthermore.
Beyond just what we see, I feel it's important that for us to also acknowledge that anyone living in the colonial United States lives in a world that was bred out of violence. Right? That this nation came from violence. And so not everyone experienced domestic violence in the home, but there's such a wide reach. Things like stalking, right? Sharing pictures and videos without consent.
Cyberbullying.
Cyberbullying can be incredibly abusive, and when these happen in the context of a relationship, it's considered domestic violence.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, when people think about the pain that exists within the LGBT community, how they feel like victims are being supported.
I think that there is a lack of support, and the only reason I say I think there's a lack of support is because, like you said, people can't name it. If you can't name it, you can't own it, you can't say what the thing is. How do you know how to respond to it? How do you know what the solution is, or how you can fix it, or what our possible options could be? So I think that if you can't even name it and say what the thing is or what is happening, how do we address it? How do we call it out?
I think it starts first with the abuser and the victim. You have to say to someone, you're not going to do this to me. You're not going to demean me. You have to stand up for yourself first and foremost before
you can address that. If you allow that into your life and into your space, you're going to allow that type of negative energy and that abuse to happen. And then when you see your friends being abused, you say to them, you don't have to take this. You are worth more than that. You are beautiful. You are kind. You affirm them. You make them feel supported and that they have your support. And I think that's what we lack overall in our communities as LGBTQ people of color is support. You know, and even as black men and women, outside of that spectrum, we turn a blind eye. Ain't my problem.
Ain't my business.
I ain't got nothing to do with
Ain't my
that.
business.
It ain't my business.
Ain't my business.
But if we're going to stand up with our brothers and sisters, we have to hold their hands and say, it's okay, I got you. He ain't got to do this. Or she ain't got to do this.
Let me speak to that because before I became a clinical therapist, you know, I always had the mindset, you know, first time something happened to you, you're a victim. Maybe second time it happened to you, you're still a victim. Third time, now you're a participant.
You're an enabler.
You're enabling the behavior that's continuing to happen to you constantly. Now you're a participant. I used to think it's so easy. Just get out, go. But as we know, as therapists and social workers across the table, it's not that easy to just say get out and tell someone. That goes back to the whole support system. I can't tell you, oh, just to get out.
My life could be over. I could rely on you for literally my survival, for my housing, for my food, to be able to live and to be able to exist. So, you know, to even think about like taking that out or removing it or just changing that, it's like, you know, someone's world will literally be switched upside down.
Yeah. And go ahead.
So our communities really do have often an issue around victim blaming, right? Where we do sometimes say things like "get out," but like you were just sharing that it's so much more complicated than just leave a relationship.
Yeah.
Something that I've been seeing more and more in my clinical offices and also just, you know, being out in the world is revenge porn. Right? People releasing images or photos, video of folks without their permission. I'm wondering if that's something that anyone has
Become a norm as
experienced.
well. It has become a norm as well.
I have not personally experienced it, but I have a friend who, and she's, you know, a heterosexual woman, and she has a baby by a man. And because he wouldn't take care of her daughter or pay child support, she released nude images of him on social media. And guess what happened? He took her ass to court for defamation of character. And that is now a thing where if you are doing revenge porn, you can be held accountable for that. You can be criminally charged. And I don't know the logistics of their case right now, but I know that she's paying for that. You know, you're defaming someone, you're bullying them. And it went viral. It was posted from page to page to page. And even though he's a man, we think men are so strong and they cannot be held to certain standards. He was affected by that. You know, people was talking about the size of his privates and how he looked in a picture. And that, I'm pretty sure, was emotionally and psychologically damaging to him. And, you know, you factor in things like sexuality or gender. And imagine what that does to the person if you don't know what they're going through up here prior to you doing that to them.
Well, that goes back to that whole power concept, making you feel so small, diminishing everything that you are, making you feel like even worthless. You know, when people who have been victims of domestic violence, sometimes they lose that sense of self. I don't even know who I am anymore. They lose that sense of self-worth, self-identity. My identity is gone. My self-worth is gone. How do we even build that person back up now?
It's a struggle, you know? If you have anything you want to add, just jump in. But that's a struggle because they have to want to build back up.
Okay.
You know, I remember when I was, and I said I was a physical abuser. He was a verbal abuser. When that relationship ended, I took time to myself to just process all of this and say, that's not who you are. You know, you're worth more. You have to want better for you. Because at the end of the day, if this affects you from this relationship and you don't resolve these issues, you will stay broken. We refuse to heal and we refuse to leave those situations. So it's not until that person wakes up and says, this shit ain't for me. I gotta get out.
What if it's not safe for someone to leave? Then what?
Then we gotta do what we can. If we have to smuggle that bitch out that house, we gotta, in the middle of the night while he's at work, doing his 11 to 7 overnight, you get that friend out and you leave town or get her out of town or whatever because you gotta do something.
I have to acknowledge that we're often talking about queer folks, trans folks, LGBTQ folks of color who might not have the strongest support networks based
This is
on
true.
their identities, and also in terms of legal or logistical support, that we're also not well represented by police necessarily or law
That is
enforcement.
correct.
We know that a lot of cases of domestic violence also include sexual violence.
Yes.
And we have seen what happens when folks speak out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, when we think about domestic violence in our communities, what strongholds, what safe spaces do we need for us to really be taking care of each other?
I think that we need to believe people. I think when people tell us that they're going through stuff, we need to believe them. When people give us signs that something is happening or that things are maybe not normal or that maybe they're hinting that shit's going on or stuff is happening that could be a little risque, I think we have to pay attention to those signs and hone in on those because that, that could be the difference between life and death for
Yeah.
someone.
And it's not
literally.
always so blatant and straightforward. You have to read between the lines
It's
sometimes
usually
with
not.
people.
It's usually not.
You know, you just gotta, especially if it's somebody you know how they conduct themselves, how they move through the world. You have to listen for those signs. There's always something that's telling you, and they're always crying out. They just don't know. They just don't want to say he's beating me, or he's abusing me, or she's abusing me. So we have to listen, actively listen, and if we can, if there are resources, I really don't know of any, in our communities as LGBTQ people of color, but if those resources are there, we got to take advantage of them. And we have to have those domestic abuse hotlines. We have to have those safe spaces or create those safe spaces if they don't exist. Because we have to think about where this could go if they don't get help or we don't step in and help them. We've lost trans men and women of color. We've lost queer men of color. We've lost everybody amongst that spectrum of color to domestic violence. But again, it's overlooked because of who we are. You know, I really appreciate, and this is jumping back to my own experiences, the police who responded to that call. They actually were responding to a different call, but they saw us fighting. And they said, why y'all fighting? I said, he wanted to throw me under the bus. He wanted to get me arrested. And I said, this is my boyfriend. They said, and they were two white guys. They said, well, if he's your boyfriend, you should love each other and not be out here fighting in the streets. I was taken aback by that because I never had that type of positive experience with police as a gay man of color. And I think we had more police like that who took a serious interest or they took serious concern in our lives as LGBTQIA people of color who are experiencing domestic violence as if we were their heterosexual counterparts, we wouldn't have as many instances of this. And that's where the problem comes at. We don't have the same protection that our counterparts have. So we have to protect one another because we don't have that.
Before we wrap up, I really just want to let anybody know who is dealing with a domestic issue. The National Domestic Abuse Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-7233. I know we talked about the resources available earlier.
Yeah.
That's all the time that we have for today. Thank you for sticking with us so far. Please stay tuned at the end of this for more resources and also some commentary on some signs and symptoms that you might want to watch for to know whether or not your relationship could be trending towards domestic violence. And as always, we want to thank you for the outpour of love and support. See you next week.
Rebel soul.